Before we roll the intro, this is Orkney. It's brilliant, it's mysterious, it's invariably spectacularly beautiful. I'm putting the conclusion of the video at the beginning because, well, we had a bit of a difficult trip, the details of which we'll be going into in these videos. However, the comments section always seems to interpret, hey, here's some frustrating aspects of public transport as a declaration of utter disgust with everyone and everything in a particular place. I mean, seriously, I make a few jokes about buses on Kefalonia and suddenly I've got a bunch of dummies asking why I hate their favourite Greek island. Because yes, only someone who truly hates a place like this would go to the trouble of filming these landscapes, writing a whole EP and putting out what essentially amounts to a 20-minute long love letter gushing about how Greece is a literal paradise on earth. So we have to have these clarifications up top, mainly because commenters rarely seem to make it past the 20-second mark. So, since people always seem to assume the least charitable interpretation, clearly, Orkney is fascinating and well worth a visit. It's a solid recommend, but the implied asterisk to that we will explain, well, now. Okay, Orkney, or the Orkney Islands, fans of the channel will already know what we're into, so if I just flash up images like this, and this without context, no one is going to be all that surprised. There's no shortage of things to pull you there. Surprisingly or otherwise, this was a first trip to Scotland low-angle flag shot. In fact, to my knowledge, it was the most northerly part of the planet we've ever reached. I've been mainly avoiding name-dropping the plague in these videos, not least because if and when we're finally rid of it, I feel like no one is going to want to be reminded of its omnipresence for, well, you're the ones watching this in the future, you tell me. Which came first, flying cars or the end of COVID? But because the rules were different in Scotland, it's something that keeps surfacing as an issue again and again to the point where it needs mentioning. Well, the first leg of our trip brought us to Inverness. Inverness is the last major town in the north of Scotland and hence it's been dubbed a gateway to the Highlands, so a lot of transport links are going to be heading through there. In brief, Inverness is an interesting case. As you can see, to our pleasant surprise, we actually had a nice sunny afternoon to look around. There's definitely some beautiful architecture and some lovely details. Yeah, absolutely. But with that, the skyline is also assaulted with some really severe brutalism. I mean, it's bad. I mean, when one side of the street is this, and this is the other, like some post-war town planners really did not pay any attention to the character of the city. We walked along the river where the castle is visible, glanced around the cathedral. None of these places were open thanks to the plague, but they were nice to see. After a loop of the river, we dropped bags at our B&B, which was just a B because of the plague. There's a whole cluster of them just on the western bank of the river. Had a sudden craving for fish and chips, so we went here. It was pretty good, but be prepared to watch all the locals get served ahead of you. Ended up being about a 45-minute wait on takeout. But still, we ate by the river with what must be one of the best views in town. Felt like the sort of banner ads you see where it says, "Explore European city breaks." Not entirely sure why all the churches got stacked together by the river only a few yards from each other. Doesn't seem like the best strategy for evangelism, but it definitely makes for a spectacular skyline. Well, Inverness was not quite as sunny and inviting by the next day. I did seek out coffee for the rest of the morning. Everything the previous afternoon had closed unusually early, so we barely had a chance. Well, this place was pretty close to kind of what you'd expect from just a supermarket cafeteria. This place was alright, but way above the rest, the gold easily goes to Coyote Coffee. The staff know what they're up to, good machine and proper attention to blend. Yeah, that's your place. Anyway, Inverness it's aight. I won't devote a great amount of time, otherwise we won't get time for Orkney. Well, we got on the train, which was barely 2 carriages along what was often just a single line of track which traces the coast to the very northern tip of Scotland. The train ride was quite long, I mean just a few minutes short of 4 hours, which I hadn't given much thought. I was just glad to have the connection sorted. I was hoping there'd be sweeping views of the Highlands to keep me occupied. Well, the first hour was pretty featureless, stopping at stations barely longer than most people's walk to the fridge. The second hour got intermittently more interesting and, pleasant surprise, the sun was beginning to emerge. The third hour got considerably more picturesque with deserted beaches rolling past, by the look of it mostly inaccessible unless you take your own boat or possibly a running jump over the railway tracks. From there we cut inland and the tracks followed the course of the Helmsdale River into a beautiful valley with pretty much the sort of scenery you'd expect when in the Scottish Highlands, and then onwards into a wide open space with scarcely any human civilization in sight. Eventually we pulled into Thurso, which is just slightly short of where we needed to be. The ferry itself leaves from the next town over, which is called Scrabster. Look, I've got to be honest, that just sounds like someone has set out to create the crustiest fishing village on the planet. Perhaps counterintuitively, the train doesn't actually neatly connect with the ferry service. The bus to connect us from Thurso to Scrabster just never materialised, which was nerve-wracking as we were tight for time, but if we hurried, we could briskly walk the final stretch. I mean, it's not ideal with our bags, but it's about 45 minutes on foot, and in fairness, without the bus, it's not a wealth of choice. Well, after all the jokes I've been making about Scrabster, it managed to look really rather pleasant in the evening sun, and though it was annoying we'd had to rush, there was the ferry. We were going to make it. Okay, and now, story time. Basically, we poked our heads around the door of the ticket office to check where we needed to check in, and the lady looked at us with a mixture of confusion and amusement and said, "Oh, no, you've already missed it." So the ferry is very clearly sitting in its berth, and we were 25 minutes early. So as it turned out, the ferry guys wanted you there 30 minutes before departure to check in, even if you're just a foot passenger. Well, look, okay, this is helpful. So I asked the lady if they could please just let us board, and she called the boat, chatted for a moment, put the phone down, and no, you can't. Bear in mind, the boat is still just sitting there, and we'd only missed the cutoff by a factor of a few minutes. And this is the 7 p.m. It's the last ferry of the day, so we can't just catch another one. So the woman just shrugs and offhandedly suggests we try the inn down the road and see if they have any rooms. So I'm still kind of in shock, and they're just going to sit there for the next 25 minutes but not let us on. I've never missed a major travel connection before, like a plane or a ferry, but even with the ample time still left on the clock and Jen actually in tears, the lady just closed the ticket hatch on us, and that was that. So, would it shock you if I have quite a low opinion of Northlink ferries? I still find it hard to believe that with the ample time left on the last ferry of the day, that's the moment where you show just a shred of common human decency, not, "Oh, sucks to be you, go find a hotel." So we were stranded at the top tip of Scotland with nowhere to stay, and in case it's not obvious from the name, Scrabster, it's not exactly a bustling inner city metropolis. This is a pretty sparse place. There is next to nothing here. Now, in case you thought I was holding this against the Scottish people themselves, a couple pulled up in a car who'd just seen the whole episode go down and saw that Jen was really upset and offered us a lift back up the hill to, well, anywhere we could find accommodation. And they were absolute guardian angel types. I mean, you have no idea how thankful we are that they showed up. Thankfully, we managed to get a, not exactly cheap considering, but adequate little room at this place. And hey, later on, after we notified her that we wouldn't be checking in till the following day, our Airbnb host, quite unprompted, just refunded us the cost of the night we missed, which, absolutely didn't have to, just a simple act of kindness. From what she described, it sounds like most people on the islands have had their own experience of missing the ferry and being stuck in Scrabster with less than spectacular accommodation choices. So that is how we ended up with all this footage of Thurso Bay, which, okay, on a sunny evening is quite nice considering. And yeah, hugely grateful for the people who ended up helping us out of a very tight corner. But still feeling pretty much every emotion possible, partly relief that we'd managed to sort out a last-minute bed, but also mostly anger and just embarrassment. I think most people have had that dream, right, where you've woken up late and get to the airport too late or some variation on that theme. And yeah, playing out that little drama IRL was not fun. And 25 minutes. Guys, really? Really? All you need is the most basic level of human empathy to say, well, hey kids, you are a bit late, but since it's only 5 minutes and this is the last ferry of the... Oh, go on you scamps, but next time... Ugh. Well, we went to sleep in this place. Woke up, minus the blue skies this time, so we packed up and left by midday, not before using the stairs at our own risk. Whew, yeah, we like to live on the edge. Walked down Scrabster for a second time, so we fought through the crowds to get to the boat. No wonder they have to close the hatch so early. They can barely cope with the hordes of people. Down a packed corridor onto the Hamnavo, which seems to think of itself as a classy place. So we are, let's see, about halfway through our runtime, and now we are finally getting to Orkney. I must have banked nearly an hour of footage standing on the rather ironically named Sundeck, filming the towering cliffs. This is Hoy. It's not technically the southernmost island of Orkney, but it is the highest. Of particular note is this gigantic sea stack, which is just casually flicking a middle finger to gravity at about 137 metres tall. I often find myself looking at some of the edifices along the Dorset Jurassic coast, and I wonder if they'll still be standing when I'm an old man. Well, pretty sure the old man of Hoy almost certainly won't be, not at this height at least. Eventually, we pulled away from Hoy and into sight of the Orkney mainland. A bit of a paradoxical title, but a good excuse for a quick geography lesson. So if you count everything here, there are around 70 islands that make up Orkney, 20 of which are inhabited. However, just north of Hoy, this island is easily the largest, and these islands and islets here are just close enough to form a main road that connects them to the southern tip. So the ferry's linked to Stromness, which is the second most significant town on the islands, and as you can see, it's a tropical paradise. Okay, sidebar. Obviously, rather sour about our trip getting ruined by Northlink, but don't mistake my tone as a distaste for Scotland in general. I mean, I don't want to spoil all the locations right now, but suffice to say, as you can see, it is stunning up here. The key is, of course, to kind of lean into the bleakness. The bleakness is what makes it special. But look, and I'm sure the Scottish would happily agree on this, I mean, sunshine wouldn't hurt, given the choice, and while the rugged natural coastline particularly has an incredible romanticism to it under leaden skies, the grey that sits over the islands for much of the year is probably not anyone's first choice. Well, anyway, we got ashore and got a bus to our Airbnb, which was just by the village of Stenness. Now, if the ferry nearly ruined our trip, the Airbnb saved it. We chose this particularly because of its view across the Brodgar Peninsula, which we'll be seeing in a bit, but it's the Neolithic heart of the island, and it was just so nice to have it in walking distance. I'm going to put a link to the Airbnb in the description. It's basically the perfect location, and we absolutely loved it. Really do recommend staying here. Well, we didn't stay indoors for long. We wandered down to the Stones of Stenness. This is a partial stone circle that may be one of the oldest henge enclosures in the British Isles. The outline of these remaining stones standing against the sky will be a very familiar silhouette to anyone who's got a passing interest in the Neolithic. There's a tale we're not going into fully, but while we were there, we bumped into this dude who just did not understand social cues, and while we were politely trying to wrap up the conversation, he was just chewing our ears off about energy and how he'd had this vision of an angry Viking whose journey he needed to fulfill by... It's like, oh my goodness, dude. I'm trying to be polite by not just heel turning and walking away, but seriously, come on, read the room. You do bump into some interesting types for sure when you explore Neolithic sites, but for the most part, they are friendly, slightly quirky folk who might share some mildly interesting worldviews if you get into conversation, but generally, they're affable types who enjoy outdoor walks, and they're a sociable, friendly bunch to everyone they meet. The online community of them is genuinely a very inclusive place, so, shout outs to all my Neolithic enthusiasts. Well, we eventually managed to excuse ourselves from Energy Guy to catch a bus. We'd be back to check out more of the Neolithic stuff around there later because we needed one of the few Sunday buses to get us to Kirkwall. Kirkwall is the capital of the islands and the largest town by quite a margin. Now, between the plague closing half of everything, the low grey clouds, and a Sunday afternoon, it was pretty subdued. Now, okay, look. As I've already said, anytime I talk about somewhere in anything less than rapturous praise, I get angry pushback. But what do you want me to say? I love it. This is perfect. There is nowhere I'd rather be. I never need to visit Nafplio again. Are people really going to fight me on this? Or are we happy to say, okay, Orkney, stunning coastlines, some of the most significant heritage in the entire British Isles, Kirkwall and Stromness could use some economic investment. Is that really that controversial? Am I going to have angry islanders defending these exquisite Pebble Dash alleyways? I mean, Pebble Dash is kind of a big thing here. I can't be the only one who finds this kind of an eyesore. I mean, surely not even the most ardent architectural enthusiast is going to argue over this. Perhaps it's an anachronism, but I thought that the architecture on the islands might be more akin to this than this. And that is, a large measure, the suffocating cladding that makes Kirkwall seem grey and depressing. Point of comparison here, Worth Matravers and Langton Matravers in Dorset. They're grey and fascinating. If Kirkwall's architecture was like this, or this, then I would not stop singing its praises between now and the end of the episode. Worse yet, there's a few historic buildings that appear to have been updated with Pebble Dash. And it's not that Kirkwall doesn't already have some lovely architecture. The Cathedral of St Magnus is of course the breakout star. It stands out in the landscape of the town. It's a Romanesque cathedral begun in 1137 with Gothic elements added later. This was at a time when Orkney was still a Norse kingdom, independent from the Scottish crown. When people think of the Norse, everyone goes straight to pagan axe wielders from the 800s onwards. That's the sort of Viking content people want to see. Well, Spoiler alert!
Spoilers from history.
But by the 1100s, Christianity was widespread throughout the Nordic world. By the 1160s, there were archdioceses in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and Orkney itself might have been Christianized as early as 995. St. Magnus was sadly not open for visitors at this point during the plague, but okay. Next door, there's also the ruined bishops' and earls' palaces, which, while not technically a castle, may as well be Castle Kirkwall, and that's definitely worth a look as well. As for the rest of the town, the high street was also pretty subdued. Something that is very cool about Orkney, given we're rather remote, not a huge amount of sunlight to go around, yeah, but there is a really vibrant community of creatives that seems to have coalesced on the islands. This is everything from a selection of jewellery makers, painters, makers of various Nordic-themed ephemera, harking back to the island's Viking heritage. Now that I hugely respect. It's really nice to see independent creators coming together and helping each other out. Well, it was Sunday and the plague had closed up a lot of the food places, leaving us with few eating options, so I'd be lying if I said my heart was soaring as we went back to our accommodation. Clouds are one thing, but it was the fog that really saps the mood, because if visibility is only 100 yards, you can't even enjoy the landscape, rain or shine. This trip did really bring home the healing power of some tea and a couple of slices of toast. Our host had been kind enough to stock the place with a few supplies, and getting home, boiling the kettle and enjoying the simple pleasure of a mug of tea and a slice of buttered toast, that was a spiritual experience. Well, we are halfway through our Orkney trip, and I know so far this doesn't seem like a stunning endorsement. It doesn't help that all the amazing stuff we got to see around the islands was basically on days 4 through 6, when we had a hire car or we were travelling to different islands. The following morning, rose at about 5 a.m, but we're pretty far up the northern hemisphere, so you'd never tell. Walked down to the Stones of Stenness again. The bonus of being around there this early was pretty much guaranteeing the place to myself, apart from the great many sheep that occupied the area. I definitely felt more in touch with the elements that morning, by which I mean the soaked grass was drenching my incredibly inadequate trainers. It was also slug Mardi Gras. I mean, I was trying really hard, but unsuccessfully, to step around all of them. But crossing over the bridge, taking in the water gently lapping against the shore, observing the ancient moss-covered standing stones that marked the way, and while it had taken a lot to get here, at long last, this is the Ring of Brodgar. I'm just going to let the footage speak for itself. So yeah, seeing the Ring of Brodgar, that was a huge relief and the fulfillment of a long-held ambition to go and see this for ourselves. The effort you have to go to makes you appreciate it even more when you actually get to stand there for yourself. And while I probably don't have to say this, but the way it occupies a place in the middle of a largely natural landscape does make it extra special. You can all stop typing, by the way. We all know that these are not the only Neolithic bits in the area. The Ness of Brodgar didn't have an excavation season that year. Maes Howe was closed for months, as were basically all the other chambered cairns. We just saw what we could on this trip. So as a natural break point, we're going to end the episode here, and next episode we'll be getting into all the high points of our trip, both figuratively and literally. So, okay, the Inverness train ferry combo, even without all the Northlink drama, is pretty much just a huge headache. That bus that never showed up, which is the only connection from the train to the ferry, that's sort of emblematic of the whole route. It's like somehow you're not supposed to try and get to Orkney that way. It's not impossible, but you'll be punished for it. Alternatives? Well, we didn't fly to Orkney because you pretty much don't get change from about £200 per person. Now, I'm not about to go all Wendover Productions on the profitability of running local and small-scale air routes to remote communities, but we've flown to Jordan for less than that. A lot less than that. So those are your choices, really. Overpay for a connecting flight, or please feel free to pick another airport and overpay even harder if you prefer. Or try and link together a handful of trains from Inverness, don't put any trust in Thurso buses, and just hope that Northlink don't leave you to fend for yourselves for the night in Scrabster. Not including your travel time to Inverness, the train from Inverness is about 4 hours. You'll need over an hour to get to the ferry, which itself is an hour and a half. So just that Inverness leg is pushing 7 or 8 hours one way. None of which, I should point out, is the Orcadians' fault. I mean, spare a thought. If I'm feeling a bit sour about the cost and effort of getting to and from the islands, imagine having to make that choice any time you want to get to the mainland. And after all we've said, you might think that we're trying to dissuade people. Look, I am thrilled that we got to go. As you see properly next episode, there were lots of things that were just amazing, things you would never get just by staying put in England. I am in the process of figuring out when we can go back again. I still want to see the Shetland Isles as well, so I might try and combine the two if time allows. But all I'm saying is, you'll have to work for it. Getting to see the Ring of Brodgar, the Cliffs of Hoy, Skara Brae, the rest of the coastline, it does come at quite an overhead. So that was part one. The music you've been hearing in the background is ours. We make the music for each episode we do, and the Orkney EP is now up on Bandcamp. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. We haven't talked about these, but I do hope you've noticed on the channel that we do upload some of our tracks as visualizers. And I'm at least 50% sure that the overture from the Orkney suite is probably the best thing we've made yet. So the very next thing to go up on the channel is going to be that. So give that a watch, otherwise we'll catch you all in part 2.